Section 48 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 31, Part 1. There is, perhaps, no comparison so apposite, though it be a homely one, to the condition of affairs in Italy at this time, upon the election of a new pope, as that of a change of trumps at a game of cards. All persons and matters remain the same as they were before, yet their values and relationships are all changed. The aspect of the entire scene is altered. Those who before were in little esteem are exalted, and those who were in great power and estimation are abased. All the persons with whom Inglesant had been connected were more or less affected by it, except Cardinal Rinuccini, to whom it made little difference. To the cavalier and to Malvolti it was ruin. The former was so deeply involved in debt, in private feuds and entanglements with the authorities, his character was so utterly lost with all parties, and his means of usefulness to any so small, that it is probable that even the elevation to power of the Berrerini faction would not have been of much use to him. But whatever might have been his prospects had the election resulted otherwise, his only chance now of safety from prison and even death was in Inglesant's connection with his sister, and in the protection he might hope to experience upon that account. His only hope depended upon the force of Inglesant's affection. The fear of private assassination kept him almost confined to his chamber. Malvolti's circumstances were still more hopeless. Notorious for every species of vice and crime, and hateful even to the very bravos and dregs of the Italian populace, he had now lost all hope of alliance or even assistance from his friend the cavalier, who discarded him the moment that he was of no further use. Maddened by this treatment and by despair, no way seemed open to him except that of desperate revenge. Towards Inglesant his hatred was peculiarly intense, being mixed with a certain kind of superstitious dread. He regarded him almost as the shade of his murdered brother, returned from the grave to dog his steps. It was his presence which had thwarted his last desperate attempt within the conclave, his last hope of earning protection and rewards. He expected nothing but punishment and severe retribution at Inglesant's hands. Surrounded as he was by perils and enemies on every side, this peril and this dreaded enemy stood most prominently in his path. A blow struck here would be not only a measure of self-defence, but a sweet gratification of revenge, and a relief from an appalling supernatural terror. This terrible semblance of his murdered victim once out of his path, he might hope that the vision of a bloody hearthstone in England might not be so constantly before his eyes. To Inglesant himself, the bright prospects which seemed opening before him gave little satisfaction. He was exhausted in body by his long detention within the conclave, and the tone of his spirit was impaired by the intrigue and hypocrisy of which he had been a witness and a partaker. It is impossible to kneel morning after morning before the sacrament in a spirit of worldliness and chicane, without being soiled and polluted in the secret places of the soul. The circumstances of his visit to Umbria and to Florence, howbeit in both he had been preserved almost by a miracle from actual sin, had left an evil mark upon his conscience. He felt little of the sweet calm and peace he had enjoyed for a season in the company of Molinos during his first visit to Rome. Something of his old misery returned upon him, and he felt himself again the sport of the fiend who was working out his destruction by some terrible crime of which he was the agent, and the Italian murderer the cause. "This man is the at large in Rome," said Don Agostino to him one day. "I should advise you to have him assassinated. It is time the earth was rid of such a villain, and the Roman law is useless in such a case. All protection is withdrawn from him, and every man, high and low, within the city will rejoice at his death." Inglesant shook his head. "I do not value my life, God knows, at a straw's worth," he said, "because he murdered my brother. foully and treacherously. He and I shall too surely meet some day, but the time has not yet come. Surely if the devil can afford to wait, much more can I. He spoke more to himself than to the other, and there is reason to suppose that Don Agostino made arrangements to have Malvolti assassinated on his own responsibility, but the Italian avoided his bravos for a time. Some short time after the Pope's election, in the height of the Carnival, a masked ball was given in the Palace Doria, at which Don Agostino had arranged a set composed entirely of his own friends. It was composed in imitation of the old comedies of the Atellani, upon which the Punchinello and Harlequinade of all nations had been formed, and which, being domestic dramas performed in masks by the Roman youth with an old-fashioned elegance and simplicity, were peculiarly fitted for performance at a modern masquerade. A primitive and rude form of pantomime, founded on caricature and burlesque, with a few characters boldly drawn, has none of the charm of the later comedy, which is a picture of real life with its variety of character and incident, and possesses that excellent art of showing men as they are, while representing them as they seem to be. But though it fell short of this higher perfection, the broad farce and few characters of the older form of comedy are not wanting in much lively and yet serious painting of human life, which is all the more serious and pathetic from its broad and unconscious farce. The jester, the knave, the old man, the girl, the lover, these types that are eternal and yet never old, with the endless complication in which, both on the stage and real life, they are perpetually involved, are susceptible of infinite application and interest to the imagination. As the rehearsal progressed, Inglesant was struck and interested with these ideas, and as the night came on, there seemed to him to be in the world nothing but play within play, scene within scene, between the most incidental acts of an excited and boisterous crowd and the most solemn realities of life and death. It seemed to him impossible to distinguish otherwise than in degree. All appeared part of that strange interlude which, between the dramas of eternity, is performed continually upon the stage of life. The set was a large one, consisting of the ordinary pantomime types, supplemented by duplicates, peasants, priests, sbirri, always a favourite subject of satire and practical jokes, country girls, and others. Don Agostino, whose wit was ready and brilliant, took the part of clown or jester, and Inglesant that of the stage lover, a role requiring no great effort to sustain. The part of Columbine was sustained by a young girl, a mistress of Don Agostino, of considerable beauty and wit, and as yet unspoiled by the wicked life of Rome. She was dressed as a contadina, or peasant girl, in holiday costume. Harlequin was played by a young count, a boy of weak intellect, involved in every species of dissipation, and consigned to ruin by designing foes, of whom some were of his own family. As the ball progressed, the party attracted great notice by the clever interludes and acts they performed between the dances. In these the usual tricks and practical jokes were introduced sparingly, relieved by a higher style of wit, and by allusions to the topics of the day and to the foibles of the society of Rome. The parts were all well sustained, and Don Agostino exerted himself successfully to give brilliancy and life to the whole party. The young Harlequin count, who had at first seemed only to excel in lofty capers and somersaults, was the first who showed tokens of fatigue. He became gradually listless and careless, so that he changed his part and became the butt of the rest instead of their tormentor. A dance in sets had just begun, and Inglesant could not help being struck with his disconsolate manner, which showed itself plainly even through his mask and disguise. It seemed that others noticed it as well, for as Inglesant met the contadina in one of the combinations of the figure, she said in the pause of the dance, "Do you see the Count Cavalier? He is on the brink of ruin, body and soul. His cousin, and one or two more who are in the set, are engaged with him in some desperate complication, and are working upon his feeble mind and his terror. Cannot you help him at all?" When the dance ceased, Inglesant went over to the Count, intending to speak to him, but the cousin and others of the set were talking earnestly to him, and Inglesant stepped back. He saw that the longer his treacherous friends spoke to him, the more broken down and crushed in spirit did the poor Harlequin count become. And it was evident to Inglesant that here a play was being enacted within the play, and that, as often is the case, one of the deep tragedies of life was appearing in the fantastic dress of farce. As he stood dreamily watching what occurred, Don Agostino called him off to commence another comic act, and when at the first pause he turned to look for the Count, he could no longer see him. His cousin and the others were present, however, and soon after the set was again formed for another dance. The stifling air of the crowded rooms and the fatigue of the part he had to perform wrought upon Inglesant's brain. The confused figures of the dance dazzled his sight, and the music sounded strange and grotesque. As the partners crossed each other, and he came again to the contadina. In his turn she grasped his hand in hers, and said hurriedly, "Do you see who is standing in the Count's place?" Inglesant looked, and certainly in the place of the dance, which should have been occupied by the Count, was a tall figure in the dress of a white friar, over which was carelessly thrown a black domino, which allowed the dark fiery eyes of the wearer to be seen. "The Count has gone," whispered the girl, trembling all over as she spoke. "No one knows whither. No one knows who this man is who has come in his place. He is gone to drown himself in the river. This is the devil who supports his part." In spite of the girl's visible agitation and his own excitement, Inglesant laughed, and taking her words as a jest, turned again to look at the strange mask, intending to make some ludicrous comment to reassure his friend. To his astonishment, the words died upon his lips, and an icy chill seemed to strike through his blood and cause his heart to beat violently. A sensation of dread overpowered him. The dance music sounded wild and despairing in his ears, and the ever-varying throng of figures, waving with 1,000 colours, swam before his eyes. In the appearance of the stranger, which was simply that of a tall man, there was nothing to account for this, and except that he kept his piercing eyes steadily fixed upon Inglesant, there was nothing in his manner to attract attention. Inglesant went through the rest of the dance mechanically, and suddenly, as it seemed to him, the music stopped. The dance being over, most of Don Agostino's party, tired with their exertions, withdrew to the buffet of an adjoining apartment for refreshment. Inglesant had taken off his mask, and standing by the buffet, a little apart from the rest, was fanning himself with it, and cooling his parched throat with iced wine, when he was aware that the strange figure had followed him. It was standing before him with a glass in its hand, which it seemed to fill from a bottle of peculiar shape, which Inglesant recognized as one only used to contain a rare Italian wine. "Cavaliere," the strange mask said in a soft and polite voice, "this wine will do you more good than that which you are drinking. It cools and rests the brain. Will you drink with me?" As he spoke, he offered Inglesant the glass he held, and filled another, and at the same instant the contadina came up to Inglesant and hung upon his arm. Inglesant, who was unmasked, stood with the glass in his hand, waiting for the other to remove his domino before he bowed and drank, but the stranger did not do so. After a moment's pause, amid the breathless silence of the whole group, who were looking on, the stranger said, speaking with a courteous speech and gesture, which, if enacted, were perfectly well assumed, "Pardon me that I do not remove my mask. It is my misfortune that I am not able to do so." Impressed by the other's manner, it struck Inglesant in a moment that this must be some great noble, perhaps a prince of the church, for whom it would be injudicious to appear unmasked, and bowing courteously, he raised the glass to his lips. As he did so, the black eyes of the disguised friar were fixed steadily upon him, and the contadina said in his ear, in an eager, frightened whisper, "Do not drink." The tremor of her voice and of her figure on his arm brought back in a moment the terror and distrust which the bearing and manner of the other had dispelled, and raising the cup, he let his lip rest for a moment in the liquor, but did not drink. Then, replacing the glass upon the buffet, he said coolly, "It is a good wine, but my English habit has spoiled my taste. I do not like the Italian volcanic wines." "I regret it," said the other, turning away. "They are a quietus for the fever of life." The party breathed more freely as he left the room, and the contadina, taking the glass which Inglesant had put down, emptied its contents upon the floor. They followed the domino into the ballroom, where they saw him speaking to the Count's cousin and to 2 or 3 others of the group who had remained there or sought refreshment elsewhere. End of section 48.